Hi, everyone. Welcome to our session today, Organizing for Community Broadband Planning. Today's session is co-sponsored by the Wisconsin Public Service Commission, the University of Wisconsin-Madison Division of Extension's Organizational and Leadership Development Program and Extension's Community Economic Development Program. I'm Gail Height, Professor of Practice, Broadband Specialist with the University of Wisconsin-Madison Division of Extension. We have a poll up on the screen right now. If as you're coming in and we're waiting for participants, if you could take a few minutes to answer our 3 questions, we'll visit that poll later in our presentation. We're happy you could join us today. And before we begin, we have a few housekeeping details I want to go through. Please mute your mics unless you're speaking. We will have plenty of opportunities today for discussion and questions. If you have an immediate question, you can enter that in the chat below and drop it in the chat. And Brandon Hofstad, who will be handling our technical assistance today, will make sure we get your questions answered. We will be recording this session, and you will be able to access it on the Extension Community Economic Development webpage. We will also provide you with a link to access the video and worksheets at the end of the session. And I'm fortunate today to have with me 2 of my colleagues, Jessica Beckendorf. Jessica is the Digital Equity Facilitation Specialist and Community Development Educator with the University of Wisconsin-Madison Division of Extension, and Sarah Spasser, the Organizational Leadership Development Program Manager with University of Wisconsin-Madison Division of Extension. We'll now take a look at our workshop objectives. And Jessica, you want to move us forward, please? Okay, today we're going to focus on preparing for your broadband and digital equity plan. And these are our objectives for the day. What we hope to do is identify local partners and community members who can inform your planning, discuss your planning team roles and responsibilities, and the value of having a team charter, and explore questions that can help you write your vision and your goals. We have a couple of resources, and Jessica was going to drop that link in the chat. There we are from Sarah. The resources that we have today, you'll need to download those. So if you go to the chat, you can click on the link, and we will utilize those resources as we're working through our workshop today. Jessica and Sarah have the poll. Maybe we can take a look at some of where our poll. Sarah, can you share those results with us?
Yeah, they should be shared now and available for people to take a look at.
Okay, and I think one of the things we wanted to take a look at was, we know you're all coming into today's workshop at a different place. And some of you have a planning team already. You may call it a planning team, a work group, an advisory group, a leadership team, or just a plain committee. Others of you don't have a plan, and that's okay. We want you to know that wherever you're coming from is okay, and we hope that today's presentation will provide you with some tips and some resources to help you move forward wherever you are in the process. Okay. Internet for all. Before we talk specifically about planning, we want to define the term internet for all. We're going to be using that throughout our workshop. That term you've heard from NTIA as we're taking a look at planning for broadband. So what do we mean when we talk about internet for all? Internet for all in Wisconsin means that all Wisconsinites are going to have access to affordable broadband service, and equitably share in the benefits of broadband technology. Our mission is to make sure high-speed internet is both available and affordable for all Wisconsinites. Internet for all, the benefits are going to be improved and enhanced health, education, economic opportunity, and quality of life for everyone in Wisconsin. Okay. Your broadband and digital equity planning team should include a focus on striving towards internet for all. In addition, we hope your planning will result in a written plan for your community that's going to include clearly identified needs related to access, adoption, and affordability, digital literacy, financial and human resources. We hope it prioritizes those needs and proposes solutions that reflect the community's core values and focus on internet for all. Planning is a process and we use to determine shared goals and a course of action to obtain those goals. Planning offers a number of benefits, including a clear path for action and reduced uncertainty, innovative ideas and effective decisions, improved performance and efficient use of resources, better coordination, less duplication, and effective engagement of individuals most impacted by the issue. As part of the planning team, leading your local broadband and digital equity planning, it's important to keep in mind several key factors. We want folks to model their shared leadership, include perspectives, opinions, and experiences from community members and partners, are intentional about engaging individuals most impacted in the issue, use various data sources to inform your decisions, consider how issues in the community are interrelated, build on assets and strengths of your community, and actively seek equitable solutions. In case you aren't familiar with the term shared leadership, it simply means that each member of a team is clear about their roles and contributions to the planning effort. And they take ownership and responsibility for their part in the process. I'm now going to turn it over to Jess.
Good morning, everyone. Let's dig into engaging your local partners and community members on your broadband and digital equity planning. Can you hear me? I'm getting a notice from Zoom. Okay, it's fine. Okay. Several of the principles of effective planning remind us of the importance of engaging community members and local partners in planning. For the next few minutes, we're going to spend some time talking about who should contribute to your broadband and digital equity planning. Sometimes we use the term stakeholders to refer to these individuals. We're going to talk about two broad categories, local partners and community members. Most of you are likely already familiar with these two groups. Just to get us all on the same page, we're going to give you a quick definition of what we mean when we say local partners and community members. So local partners are organizations in the community that have an interest in broadband and digital equity. For example, local governments, schools, the business community, nonprofits, libraries, emergency services, healthcare, and I'm sure you can think of many more examples. They may offer specific insight into broadband and digital equity needs. They may offer specific expertise that is useful in your planning, or they may have influence or other resources that can contribute to proposed solutions. So what we mean when we say community members, and you can probably guess the meaning of this, but For the purposes of today, we're referring to community members as individuals or groups in the community who can provide perspectives, opinions, and experiences that will also inform your plan. You can think of community members as likely users who will benefit personally and professionally from access to broadband and the tools and resources that support their digital equity. You may have noticed, excuse me, you may have noticed that we didn't include internet service providers in that list. In part, it's because this is the community's plan. That said, gaining input from ISPs really is critical to understanding where high-speed internet infrastructure is needed, the cost structures in place, and understanding the future plans of ISPs in your area. But some things to keep in mind when it comes to the idea of having ISPs on your planning team, some things to consider would be community ownership of the plan. Again, this is the community's plan. So having an ISP as a member of the team that writes a proposal or a plan could raise some questions about if the plan is community driven or if it's influenced by the ISP's business plan. There's the potential of perceived favoritism. So including, for example, just one ISP, even if initially there only seems to be one logical candidate, could expose the planning team's efforts to claims of favoritism if another ISP later appears on the scene. And then another consideration is the hesitancy of team members to contribute. So including an ISP on the planning team may discourage other planning team members from actively participating and voicing their opinion, even if they could make a valuable contribution. The important takeaway here is that the ways in which you involve ISPs should complement rather than dominate the planning process. All right, so now we promised you some time to start putting into practice what we're doing. I'm going to walk you through a worksheet that we've provided. I'm wondering if it hasn't been dropped, if the link hasn't been dropped in the chat again. Sarah just dropped it in again. Please click on the link in the chat and download the worksheet called, which worksheet is this one? I'm going to go to that sheet so I can remember. Yes, the Engaging Local Partners and Community Members worksheet. Download that worksheet, and I'm just going to show it to you right here. All right. Here it is. All right. Okay. So this is a worksheet that is scarily long. Please don't let that scare you away. It's really meant to get your creative juices flowing, your thinking going about which partners and which community which community members should be involved in your process and in what ways they should be involved. So the worksheet starts with local partners, and we list a number of local partners here. If you've downloaded it, you will be able to edit this, and we left some spots open at the bottom of this list for you to add in some additional ones if you like. So we're going to have you do a thinking exercise where we're just going to have you go through and start to think about these different groups, share whether, there's a little checkbox here, share whether they are already involved in your planning efforts or whether you think, they're not involved yet, but they should be invited to the planning team, or whether you think that you would involve them just another way. And this is one of those worksheets that you can bring to your planning team and you can do a thinking exercise together. on this. And you could give them all a copy of the sheet and you could have them fill it in themselves, or you can go through it as a group and have that conversation. So we're going to give you a few minutes now to just really start going through that for yourself and thinking on how these different groups could and should be involved. This is kind of an exploratory exercise, but if you can, just make a couple of notes, and we're going to put you into breakout rooms. We're going to put you into random breakout rooms with people that you are not working with necessarily on this. And we would love for you to kind of walk through it together and have a conversation together about how you're interpreting this and how this is playing out in your community. So who is on or not on your teams, and listen to the others. And it might give you some ideas for how, for the conversation you might bring back to your planning team. And rather than continuing to explain to you what this is, why don't I let you dig in and start practicing? I'm hoping that this explanation of it gave you some time to download the program. Please let us know if you're having trouble with that. And it looks like the breakout rooms are ready. Does anyone have any questions about what I'm asking you to do before we send you to the breakout rooms?
Hi, this is Lorena from WEDC, and I am not finding, I was able then to get the agenda, I mean, not the agenda, the presentation, but I am not finding this form. You mentioned you put it in the chat, but I am not.
It's located, if you were able to download the presentation, it would have been
Yes.
one of the two links above the presentation.
Oh, okay. It's within the presentation. Okay.
Nope, it's one of the links above the presentation. If you went to the link that's in the chat. Here, let me share.
So yeah, I was gonna say, if you share, you want me to share my screen? I've got it up.
Can you see it on mine? Yep.
Yep, we can.
Yep, it is this one
Yes,
right
thank
here.
you. Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No, that's okay. No problem at all. Okay. Ready for breakouts? Any other questions? It's really just looking at this and having a conversation about what's going on in your community and who's in and who isn't in yet. So Dave, we will get you that link right now. All right.
All right. I will open the breakout rooms now.
Thanks.
And if you're having any trouble finding the breakout rooms, just let us know. All right. I see we do have a few who haven't joined. If you would like to join the breakout room and you're just not quite sure where to find it, please let us know and we will help you locate how to get into your breakout room. And Brandon, I think we might want to just pause so we don't have 15 minutes or so of us.
All right, welcome back, everyone. In a few of the rooms that Gail and I were kind of popping out of, we noticed that that one of the things coming up was whether we should be between regional planning and the local planning. It's really important to do some local planning, even if you're part of a regional effort. And Gail, I don't know if you had something you wanted to add to that.
No, I just think your plan is going to be most effective if it has some local effort to it. You at the local level are the ones who know your local community. You know what the needs are. You'll be feeding that information into your regional group, but as a local partner, you have a responsibility to look at your community. So even though we're hearing some of you are part of a regional effort, your local plan or the regional plan is only going to be as good as your input. So we encourage all of you to really listen to your community and engage them as much as possible at that local level, even if you are part of a regional effort.
Thank you, Gail. So before we move on really quick, I know that there was a lot of really great exchanges going on. Everyone was kind of sharing about introducing themselves and sharing about some of the broadband issues in their area and impacts. But are there any questions we can answer before moving on regarding, in particular, anything related to broadband, but in particular, your planning team and building that?
What is an ideal number of members on the teams?
That's a really great question. And I've heard this in a number of different settings. So anyone is welcome to kind of answer. In fact, in the chat, if you have a planning team, why don't you put in the chat how many members of your planning team, how many members are on your planning team? I think, Jean, it's kind of a matter of opinion, but I've seen a lot of really effective groups be as large as 15, which can be pretty large to say 15, but you can also be effective at that number. I think, 12 or less is a general kind of, guideline that a lot of people like to use. Gail, Sarah, in your experiences, what do you think?
Yeah, I've seen a lot of committees that range between the 8 to 12 members, and then they bring in extra folks as the planning process. But I have seen groups that are as large as 19 or 20. It's just important that however you set it up, you make sure your group all has a chance to participate and understands what their role is. And we'll talk about how you might expand your team in other ways, even if they're not part of that original core team.
Gail and Jess, I'm going to draw your attention. There's the chat, there's a question from Mark.
Yeah, why is planning local? PSC broadband installation grants cannot be applied for directly by local governments, which means broadband installation is by internet service providers. And since issues such as access and equity are statewide issues, why isn't the state handling this as a statewide issue so that there is parity between communities and all state residents are treated consistently and fairly? I know you all could read it, but I read that out loud for the benefits of the recording. I would say, and Gail, I would love for you to chime in on this, but I would say planning is local in part because as you're trying to address community needs, different communities and different people within your community may have different needs, partly because of what is currently there right now for broadband or not there, as the case is. So, when you're pairing up what your assets are in broadband and who lives in your community, that's exactly why it's really important for you to do some of that information gathering locally. What do the people in your community need versus what you currently have? That's something that will help you, I guess, create strategies that are much more targeted for your community versus something that would be a statewide effort. Gail, do you want to?
Yeah, and I think part of the regional efforts, we have some great regional efforts that are taking place out there, and we don't want to distract from those regional efforts. I think the local planning only helps to enhance that and make sure you're reaching all those communities, all those members in your community that need assistance. The Public Service Commission does a great job. They're in the process of writing a state plan on how we're going to get resources out to everyone. But they're also gathering data, right, from all the local counties. That's part of the surveys that you're doing, the county surveys, the tribal surveys, and collecting all of those great supplemental materials you're providing. But their plan is only as good as what you feed into it.
Yes.
As we get to writing some of the grants, and I heard you talk about internet service providers providing and accessing those funds, and they're doing a great job, but they also need help from you to identify where those pockets are. As we work on more of the resources and tools we'll be sharing, we'll be talking about those public-private partnerships and some of the roles that communities are going to play in helping to take a look at what areas aren't served and how do we get services to those. And so we'll be capitalizing some more on that public-private partnership, helping you explore ways to develop that. But those are some of the reasons why we're looking at local planning, because we really do want internet for all and want to make sure that we're all working together. There's no wrong answer, but regional state plans are only as good as the input they get from you at the local level.
And we need to move on to our next section. Before we do have
Oh.
members of the, oh, go ahead, Sarah.
No, I just wanted to jump in. People have been, as asked, putting the size of their
Mhm.
planning committees, but Don Mowry mentioned that they, and I think this is a really good point to kind of wrap up just your section about
Mhm.
engaging local partners and community members, is that, yeah, if you included everybody on that list, you'd have a huge committee. And so that's part of why the worksheet gets you thinking about like who might you invite to the planning team, but that's not the only way you can engage stakeholders, local partners, community members. And so one of the sets of tools we'll be getting for you, besides the activity we'll do here in a few moments, is some resources on how do you engage people in other ways besides the planning team itself.
Yes. And if you notice on the worksheet, in the number 2 column, status, it says involve another way is one of the options. This isn't just about getting people on your planning team, but it's also about thinking about how you will involve them maybe another way sometimes. Okay, we do need to move on to the next section. I did want to give an opportunity if there was anyone here. This is a little impromptu, but if there was anyone here from the digital equity team who wanted to add anything to the things that Gail and I have said about responding to Mark's question. I thought I saw a couple of mics go live.
Yeah, let me, I do, Jessica, and I have to catch up now with Mark's question. I have to go, oh, yeah. Well, Gail answered, certainly, I thought answered Mark's question, but by the way, this is Chris Stark, Mark. And I see, I'm reading your question here. Why isn't the state handling this as a statewide issue so that there is parity between communities? Actually, the state very much is right now, and there are a couple of, first of all, there's the governor's task force on broadband, which Gail is a very active member of. I'm an active member of the state digital equity and inclusion task force for the state. And so those are from the statewide perspective, but all places have not been equal from the perspective of where the internet service providers can provide broadband, for one thing. For example, perhaps southern Wisconsin, where you have a greater concentration of population, it's easier for the internet service providers to reach out to deploy fiber or wireless or just infrastructure down there because they're going to get a return on their investment. Here in the north, where I am, I'm in Eagle River, and in all the rural areas of Wisconsin, you don't get the same ROI. So all counties are not treated equally. And for example, nearby Forest County, or where I am in Vilas County, is tremendously different than some of the southern counties. And so all broadband is local, I guess you can say, in that context. And we continue to work on it. But your points about trying to get parity and equity and equality so that all communities are treated consistently and fairly is indeed what we're working on, both those groups, and trying to hone in on exactly that. So thank you for asking the question.
Okay, thank you, Chris. And now I am going to move on. I'm going to turn this back over to Gail. Let's get to the next. There we go. You're
Thank
on,
you.
Gail.
Yeah, I think you've noticed that one way to engage those local partners is for them to participate in the planning team, but that's not the only way. You do have other options on how we can bring them in. And for some people, expanding that local planning team, the core team isn't an option. We know and understand that your group was formed either by your county board, and so it's already established. So we're going to look for other ways to including folks into that planning process. But first we want to take a look at what some of the roles and responsibilities might be, regardless of the membership of your planning team. Jess, you want to hit the next one? As we take a look at those, regardless of the membership on your planning team, here are some what we think are common roles and responsibilities that might be relevant to your planning team. And you can identify, utilize some of these. You might add some of your own. But I think it's important that folks really look at those roles, and when you're inviting people, articulate what those roles are. You know, we're looking for those planning team members to really provide some insight and direction, identify, engage partners and community members. Remember, we said that your teams might already be established, but this is your opportunity to figure out how we can engage those other folks in the community to get them involved so we get the answers we need to develop those plans. Develop, document, and incorporate partner and community input. Look at ensuring deadlines are met. Document needs and resources and assets. All of our communities have assets. We want to make sure we recognize that and bring everyone in, but also look at the needs. Whose needs aren't being met? And then help to prioritize those needs and think about possible solutions. And then how are you going to communicate that process, the progress, to the community? I think that's really important. I hear a lot of folks saying, what's happening in broadband? We don't understand what's happening. So we want to give you some tools to help you communicate that process along the way. We've provided you with, in the link that was shared, we can maybe, Sarah, if you could drop that link in the chat again. We do have a planning team operations, just a general worksheet that you might be able to use that talks about roles and responsibilities, scheduling your meeting. If you haven't gotten started, this is another tool to add to your toolbox that can help you looking at some of the operations of your team as you're moving forward. With that, I think we'll turn it over to Sarah and take a look at broadband and digital equity visions and goals.
Yeah. So you've been asked to create a broadband and a digital equity vision and goal that's part of the deliverables. And we wanted to give, for some of you, this is really familiar stuff. And for others, this might be something new and sometimes can feel a little bit challenging when you're just getting started doing this, especially when you're trying to get input from a broad set of people. So let's start by defining a vision. So a vision is going to be a statement that is describing the desired future. What is it that you want the future to be like in this context of broadband and digital equity? It's something that considers what's possible, and it can be used to unite people as well as inspire and motivate them to action. Now, in an ideal scenario, you would really be engaging partners and community members right out of this, right out of the gates, right from the beginning, and helping to shape that vision as well as the goals that we'll talk about in a moment. And the reason would be, right, to make sure that that vision reflects internet for all in the context of your community or region. But we also know that sometimes you're asked to, get something written down, provide a deliverable. You need a place to start. And so what we're going to do is walk you through an activity that we really think you can adapt it or you can use it as is, and we'll provide a guide to help you with this activity if you want to do this locally. The idea here is that you can do this as a planning team, you can do this with local partners, you can do this with community members, and you can do it in multiple iterations. And so each time that you're doing this, you're adding to, refining, revising that vision that you're creating for broadband and digital equity, both locally, but again, as we were talking about, that can then feed up to a regional vision for what broadband and digital equity looks like. So I'm going to encourage you, if you have handy some paper and a pen or pencil, what I'm going to do is walk you through some questions that I'm going to invite you to silently answer. And then after we do that and we do an iteration with goals, we're going to put you back into breakout rooms to share a little bit with one another. So vision can be a bit hard to get our hands around, right? Sometimes we're like, oh, vision, how do we even begin to describe that future state? And so what we find really helpful is to have some really clear questions that you can ask yourselves and others. So again, if you've got a paper or pen handy, I'm going to ask some questions and be silent for a few moments for you to jot down your responses to these questions. So let's start with this. What would better broadband access, affordability, and adoption mean for you?
Could you repeat the question?
Yep, I can. It is also on the screen for those of you who can have a bigger screen to look at. What would broadband access, affordability, and adoption mean for you? And I'm going to move us a little bit quickly just because I want to honor our time that we've committed today together. But obviously, if you're doing this together as a planning team or with community members or partners, you'd give a little more time, right, for thought and obviously discussion. So we'll go to the next question, and you'll see that these questions start to layer on, right? We start with ourselves because it's a lot easier to begin thinking about ourselves, but then we can ask the question, what would it mean for your family or those closest to you? And I'll give you all a moment to think on that. So what would better broadband access, affordability, and adoption mean for your family or those closest to you? Now our next question goes out one more circle, and we ask ourselves, what would it mean for your neighbors? Right. So what would better broadband access, affordability, and adoption mean for your neighbors? And now we'll expand that circle again. What would it mean for your organization or business? And we use organization or business because it depends on how folks are engaging in groups in community. So what would better broadband access, affordability, and adoption mean for your organization or business? And then the last question, sort of that biggest circle out there, what would it mean for your, or you could say our community, if you were in a setting where you're talking to people who are part of your community, right? What would it mean? What would better broadband access, affordability, and adoption mean for your or our community? And as you're jotting your final thoughts, again, you would give a lot more time in a group setting for this. We're just sort of giving you an activity that you can use. And again, being very intentional about starting with the individual. It's challenging to think big picture out in the future. And so to get people thinking about themselves and then expanding that circle out from themselves to those closest to them, their neighbors, the organizations and businesses, and then the broader community, can really help ground people in getting some very clear things that would mean a better future, right? So if we can go to the next slide, these sorts of questions or versions of them that you feel are suited for your community are a great way to get input. Now, there's a lot of ways you can do that, right? You could use surveys, ask these questions through surveys. You could have one-on-one conversations with community members and partners. You could also have focus groups. That would be where you're bringing a number of people together who might have a similar interest, and having a conversation with that smaller group. Or you could have larger invited facilitated visioning sessions. And so we'll be developing resources to give you a little bit of information about each of these strategies. At this point, I simply want you to know that these very same questions or versions of them could be used in any of these sort of input gathering methods. So in addition to a vision, you have been asked, one of your deliverables is to generate goals for your community's broadband and digital equity plan. And again, that these can be goals at a local, but then also those of you working on regional plans, right, a regional level. Goals simply are specific and measurable, and when achieved, they're going to support your vision, right? So these should be in tandem together. We think about what we want to achieve, that desired future first, our vision, and then we begin to think about goals. So there's a number of ways that you can identify goals. And again, I'm going to walk you through one way that's a simple way through some questions that you as a planning team can engage each other, partners, and community members in identifying goals. So same as before, I'll ask the question and give a little bit of time for you to self-reflect. And then as we wrap this up, again, we're going to put you in breakout rooms to chat a little bit about your reflections. So let's start first with the question, what is or might get in the way of achieving your or our vision for broadband and digital equity? What is getting in the way, or what might get in the way of achieving our vision for broadband and digital equity? Now, I want to note here, one of the deliverables you've been asked for in June is what are some of the barriers? And this question is one way you can get at uncovering barriers. By asking this question of partners and community members, this starts to tell you some of the barriers to Internet for All. So I'll be quiet for a few seconds and let you just reflect on that one. the next question you can ask that helps you shape goals is to say, what will help us achieve our vision? So you've got this vision, you know some of the things that might get in the way. Now ask yourself, what will help us achieve our vision? And then once you know both of those pieces of information, you can ask the question, what one or two things could we do to make a difference and move us toward our vision, right? So we know what might be getting in the way. We have a better idea of what might help us. Now we can get more specific about the couple of things that we can do to make a difference and move us from where we are today to that vision of the future. And then the last question you can ask to help you, because remember we said goals they need to be specific and we also need to measure them. We need to understand when they're achieved. So a great question to ask is, how will we know if we're successful in achieving these goals? So how is it that we're going to look out and when we get to the future, how are we going to know that we achieve these goals? So I'm being mindful of time. I know I haven't given you a lot of individual time for reflection. Obviously in this scenario, right, both with the vision and goals, you might be having, you'd be having a conversation with people, either one-on-one or in a small or larger group setting. And so there'd be some sharing and some discussing. And so some of what you'd be doing is collecting this input, but also inviting people to think about, and Jess, you can go to the next screen even, inviting people to think about and listen for areas of agreement and alignment. Like what are some of those themes that are coming up that are, showing up across people's responses to these questions? But also it's important to explore areas of difference. Why might we have different opinions or thoughts about what that future vision would be? And that's going to help us shape and then ultimately as a planning team to take all that input and write a vision and goals. Again, I do want to emphasize that things don't always sort of time out right. So some of your deliverables include getting some of these things written down. And so maybe your first step is a planning team conversation to get an initial sort of draft, but then it's expanding that circle of conversation, inviting more and more voices into that conversation and revising and refining and adapting the vision and goals through those conversations. Yeah,
I would love to just quick add, once something is written down doesn't mean it can't change. And so if you're consider this a draft, and as you get more input from your community, and make sure that you're open to changing that. And lastly, I just wanted to add that we have this labeled as an activity, but these are almost like your next steps with the group that you, whatever, with your planning team, right? As you're trying to develop a vision, if you haven't already developed a vision, after kind of asking those questions of your group, this is like the next steps in that conversation. I know Sarah kind of said that, but I really wanted to make it explicit. We have it labeled as an activity, but this really is kind of your next steps.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying that. And as I said, we're just putting the finishing touches on a guide that will upload to that same website you've been going to, so that you can actually have a step-by-step, how can we do this very activity, or how can we have this discussion? What I'm going to do is I am going to reopen our breakout rooms. I'm going to put you back in the rooms you were in. There's a few of you I'll have to assign that have popped in since. We're only going to spend about 10 minutes because we want to leave our last 10 minutes to wrap up and any final questions. When you get in that, there's sort of two ways you can go. We've suggested on the screen, talk a little bit about some of your responses. You're not all in the same community, those of you in a breakout room, so share a little bit, but also you could talk a little bit about what could this look like? How could you use a series of questions like this to begin to shape your vision and goal? So you can go either way with your 10 minutes together, but talk a little bit about how you're going to shape that vision and goal in your community. So I'm going to open up the rooms. And again, if you weren't assigned, we'll get you into a room here shortly. All right. Kate, I think you were one that we did not have in a room before. So I'm going to get you.
You put me in room 5.
Room
before.
5. Oh, fantastic. I'm glad you can remember. Great. So there you go. And Bill, do you remember what room you were in, or do you want me to just put you in any old room? Hearing none, Bill, I'm going to send you to room 1. And then I have somebody on the phone. I'm not sure who that is. If you can hear me and would like to go back to your original room, great. Otherwise, I will just assign you to room 1 as well. Okay, awesome. I think we've got everybody assigned recording again. Okay, well, welcome back. And some of you might have just heard Jessica was saying, and I noticed too, we had a few folks that had to leave, could only stand in. Some of your rooms were still a bit large and others had smaller. So I hope 10 minutes was sort of just the right balance there. We also wanted to make sure we left the last 10 minutes of our devoted time for questions. So before I hand it to Jessica, were there any questions that came up, anything you want clarified or want to reflect on as it relates to some ways in which you can start to shape a vision and goals for your broadband and digital equity plan?
You know, the extension vision and goals are very good. And I wouldn't be surprised if we looked at them and as we tried to formulate our local vision and goals.
Oh, those are the vision and goals for the state's Internet for All, or it might even be for the governor's task force. So they're definitely, definitely. It's always great to look at examples for a really good place to start. So good idea, but I definitely wanted to give credit to this is not extensions. That's what I was trying to do.
Yeah. And Sue, building on your comment and Jess's, right, that sometimes it is helpful, like when you're just a little bit stuck, to start to see like what are other communities saying. And then there's that value of having the conversation, so that sometimes when we get them written, they feel pretty broad, maybe a little generic. And don't underestimate or undervalue the input that you're gathering and the engagement that happens when people are answering these questions together and talking about it, right? It builds buy-in, it builds a deeper understanding, even if your sort of statement might be a little bit more broad when it's finally written.
Yeah, and you are asked to submit your vision and goals. That's part of the deliverables to the PSC in June. But like Sarah said before, this is a start. That doesn't mean you're not going to change those vision and goals depending on the number of people and engagement you do at a regional and local level. So we encourage that. Just because you submit something as part of your deliverables in June doesn't mean that it can't or shouldn't change. So I just really want to emphasize that, regardless of whether it's a local plan or a regional plan.
All right. So in the chat, just a long shot. I know this is a long shot. If you have a vision already and you're willing to put it in the chat, or you have easy access to it, please do that so that some of the folks here today can start to see what others have come up with. But I know it's a long shot because I'm just impromptu asking you to do that right now. But we have come to the end of our session today. We have a number of important updates for you though. So the worksheets and recording of this meeting, we will send a new link to you where the recording of this meeting and the worksheets will be found, including the worksheet that Sarah mentioned, where it will be a process that you can bring your planning team through, a visioning process for your planning team. We have office hours coming up. You guys have a lot of work to do between now and June 19th. We're also, as part of that communication where we send you the link for the worksheets, we're going to send you a schedule and information on how to access office hours. These are technical assistance office hours. If you've got questions about putting your planning team together, or you've got questions about what to talk about at your first meeting or some other part of your process, you can attend those, and there will be a few extension folks online that and maybe others that can help you with those questions. And we have a number of other tools we're working on. One of them is just a couple of templates for you so that you can some meeting agenda templates, some suggestions for, meetings, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, some suggestions for how, a template for how to invite someone to be on your planning team. If you need them, use them. And if you don't need them, I bet we're developing other resources that you're going to need later. So we're just continually developing this. This is all going to be part of what we've been working on at Extension, part of something we're calling the Broadband Toolkit. This toolkit will be more widely available soon, but it's not quite available yet. So we're just going to be getting you these, trickling these resources to you as we go and as we're building that toolkit. The next webinar is going to be on community communication and engagement planning. So this is about engaging with the wider community, not just your planning team. The worksheet we gave you today, that really long one that had all the tables in it, that is a good start for you to think about who you might engage in that kind of wider group. I think it was one of the groups here said that they had a small planning team, but they had a much wider group of about 30 people. I believe that was Brown County, that they tap into. So this really is about engaging with that wider group. Gail, do you have anything that you want to add to these final announcements?
No, one other thing, Sarah talked a little bit about those questions and answering the questions, looking at the barriers. We know looking at those barriers and opportunities is one of the things on how we're going to reach internet for all that you're going to be talking about in your deliverables. So Sarah shared some of those questions. Another place you can start to gather those, many of you have already completed your county and tribal broadband surveys. If you haven't done that, we've extended the deadline for those. The county surveys will now be due May 31st. We still have a handful of counties that haven't done that. But as you filled out those surveys, you are already identifying some of those barriers. So that's a good place for you to start as you're looking at those deliverables for June, mid-June. That'll go to the PSC. But please, if you haven't done your survey yet, please do that. Those surveys will feed into that statewide plan that the Public Service Commission is working so hard to pull together. But we really do want it to reflect all of your needs at a regional and local level.
All right, we do have just a couple minutes for questions. Thank you to Don Mowry, who just posted in the chat Eau Claire County's Broadband Committee Vision, Mission, and Objectives. We'll kind of gather these as well and put them as examples in some of the resources. We'll give you credit, Don, and anyone else who gives us their vision and mission. So any questions from anyone about anything you heard today?
Hi, I don't have a question, but I mean, I just do want to just say one thing. I'm with Lit Communities, and I just want everyone in Wisconsin to know that you're not alone. I'm right now, I'm in Detroit, Michigan, and working with Detroit, and Michigan is just as confused and not sure what to do, and running around putting their plan together. Before Michigan, I was in Ohio. I'm a resident of Madison, Wisconsin. So Wisconsin is very dear to me. So that's why I'm always on the call. But just hang in there. I mean, we'll get there, and just keep going, keep plugging along. So that's what I wanted to say.
Thank you so much, Dexter. Planning can feel so huge, and it's what it really boils down to is a series of conversations you have with people and writing down what happened in those conversations and summarizing it. I mean, I know that that's a super simplified version of it, but I know that planning can feel big. I was a community planner for many years. So, process can feel really daunting. And Dexter, you make a really good point. Like, hang in there. It's good. It's going to happen. You're going to be fine. Any other questions?
You have to leave.
Okay. I think that, I'll stop sharing. I think we can wrap up. Thank you everyone so much for being here today. We will be in touch with more resources and this recording, and our office hours, which I'm hoping you'll take advantage of. Thank you so much. Gail, Sarah, anything you'd like to add to our goodbye?
No, thank you everyone for participating, and please reach out if you have questions, and we hope you join us for office hours.